Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this week's Professional Perspectives, where I have got the Aerospace Tribe. I've got my geek hat on today. I've been really excited about having this particular tribe on because I get to speak to lawyers and bankers and those sorts all day. So this is like a minefield for me. And every question I've had about this time-space continuum and all sorts of random things I've watched in movies will be asked tonight, I'm sure. My panelists may well start disappearing because they're not prepared for my random questions, I suspect, except Marco, who's smiling and laughing already. But yes, I am looking forward to picking their brains and understanding what happens in space and how they got into this line of work and all manner of questions that literally are sitting on my tongue. But before I start, I would ask my guests to please introduce themselves. I am going to start with Rania. Rania, if you could just tell us who you are, what area of the space industry you occupy, and maybe very briefly how you got into this line of work.
Thank you so much for the invitation first, and it's not going to be very brief, so I'm going to try to jump a little bit. My name is Rania Toukebri. I'm from Tunisia. I'm a space engineer. What I do exactly is I make the architecture of spacecraft, so satellites, telescopes, and so. I'm also making research on the satellite communication and on securing data. I'm also regional coordinator for Africa and Space Generation Advisory Council, and I do also several other activities related to the Africa development, Africa strategy, and so. I worked a little bit with the African Union Commission for the organizing events like the Africa Space Week stuff. And I support other couple of projects, and I just launched my startup on space related activities, and I hope things will get better. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Rania. Over to you, please, Eldridge.
Hi, everybody. So really happy to be here. My name is Eldridge. I don't have a very extensive background as Rania, and so impressive. So I started working in the space sector through the Angolan Space Program, where I used to be an employee at the Angolan Space Program, and one of the first people who started helping develop the Angolan Space Program. In the space sector, I worked as a project manager, and before that, I've worked as a satellite operator.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Eldridge. Over to you, please, Nelly. Nelly Helen, could you give us your salutation, please? And your line is muted. Nelly's been very coy today. I'm not sure if she can hear me. Why don't we move across to Rumimbo? My fellow Zimbabwean in the house. Rumimbo, say hello, please.
Hi, everyone. Okay, my name is Rumimbo Samanga. I am Zimbabwean. I'm from Bulawayo, Zimbabwe. And I'm a space law and policy analyst. I work in different capacity building initiatives across the continent, most importantly of which is space law and capacity. But of course, I have my hand in various cookie jars, including space education, entrepreneurship, and general awareness raising. And I really just look forward to connecting with people and trying to build synergetic links to bring space to the ordinary citizen, which is what has brought me in connection with all of these lovely individuals who I really admire so much. So that's a little bit about me. I'm a lawyer at heart. My background is actually in trade and investment, but I've been able to apply that to the space law industry. And I hope to continue to make other interesting links with space law as well from my background.
So impressive. So anyone who's watching must know that I've kind of gone out of my way, and I've been planning for this session today by getting the closest background I could to nebulas and space and all things fancy in outer space. Of course, it doesn't compare to the backgrounds I'm seeing my panelists with, but it's going to have to do for now. Nelly, do I have you to, Nelly might have dropped off. Marco, perhaps you could say hello to our audience.
Yes, hello. Now it's very complicated to talk after those very huge and amazing profiles, but let me tell that I'm Marco Romero, Air Force office from the Angolan Air Force. That's why I have this background in aeronautical engineering. And then I get opportunity to join the Angolan space program and started my career as ballistic and navigation satellite specialist. Then I made this step up on space system engineering after finishing the advanced master here in France. And right now I'm just implementing the Angolan Center for Space Studies here in Angola, because I've made all my life implementing space education programs here, engaging with the startups, making this binomial between space industry and academia. And that's what I do for living. And I'm responsible, or as you can call, CEO of 6 startups working on space application and service, education, and outreach.
Wonder where do you find time for all that stuff? I'm going to have to unpack so many questions to ask. Nelly, could I get you to say hello, please? CEO, spaceman, engineer. Gosh, the CVs here are just blowing my mind. Nelly, please say hi.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak alongside all my bosses and my colleagues. My name is Nelly Ibuka, and I'm a space advocate in the African space sector. So unlike Rania, Robimbo, and other tech guys, what I basically do is let everyone know all the wonderful work that everyone here is doing. So I talk a lot about space to young people through different space platforms, and I also try to get them involved. Like I share opportunities with young people in the African space sector. Particularly, I'm very interested in space land policy. I'm a final year law student, and I'm also interested in space awareness and space diplomacy. So I just carry out any activity along that line of interest. And I volunteer for different space organizations like the Space Generation Advisory Council, where Rania is the Africa Regional Coordinator. So I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you very much.
Well, I am more pleased to have you all on. And because we've only got an hour to go, I'm just going to dive in today. Normally, I kind of start by easing my panel in gently, making life a little bit easy. But actually, you guys, I kind of herald you the geniuses of Earth. So quite easily, I'm sure you'll be able to jump in and respond to my various questions. As I was thinking through my motivation for having you on, as with all things, I was thinking through, the dawn of the space age, which was marked, if you like, by the race between Sputnik and Explorer 1, the Soviets and the Americans. And I thought, back in 1957, what was the African continent focused on whilst these superpowers were thinking about space exploration and military tactics, their geopolitics, and all the sort of motivations they had behind sending out craft to space? And I kept coming back to, okay, is there an element of this being quite if you're thinking of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So Africa's dealing with colonization, Africa's dealing with water, Africa's dealing with basic needs. And if you're a superpower and you've got the economic capability to, chances are you can afford to think beyond sort of earthly concerns and think about going off to space. So with that, as you all know, the Hope probe went out from the UAE last week, which was very exciting for me personally. And just this idea of space being democratized more, so becoming more accessible perhaps to non-traditional players, so non-superpowers, to the corporate world, to the private sector. It's kind of changed its face from having a military focus to commercial, tourism, the works. And that prompted me to think, okay, who could I possibly talk to about this? And of course, Rimbo is like the magic wand that appeared on LinkedIn, and the rest is history. So Rimbo, thank you very much for agreeing to this and for connecting us more broadly with your colleagues. My first question to you with that long ramble is, when we start thinking through, in fact, even before the 1950s, the scramble for Africa kind of formalized Africa's colonization by European countries, right? And this was ratified, as we know, in 1884 at the Berlin Conference. But are we, or have we come to a point where there's an equivalent scramble for space? And what does that mean for our continent, quite frankly? Is there a scramble for space? Is there a race in 2021? I'd like to understand what's driven that, if your answer is yes. And I might start with who's looking most pensive. I'm going to start with Aldridge because he hasn't really smiled much yet. So maybe if I get him talking about a topic he loves, he may break into a smile. And there we go, easily done. Aldridge, tell me about the scramble for space.
Well, you were talking about something very interesting and important. Back in the 50s and 60s, you know, the I would say the developed world, or developed countries, they were already fighting the Cold War and also fighting for access in space. And in Africa, we were fighting for independence still. So it's two different fights, but a little bit correlated, because if you look at the Cold War, at the height of the Cold War, there was a time that superpowers that were actually fighting in Africa, because you had different superpowers backing different groups in Africa, right? So, but one very important thing is that in Zambia, already at that time, there was somebody who was already thinking about space. And yes, the first African astronaut. He was training people to go to Mars back in the 50s, all right?
Out of Zambia.
Yes. He had already a Mars station in Zambia during that time, training people in Zambia with astronaut suits not to go to the moon, because at that time the Americans were thinking about going to the moon, the Russians were also thinking about going to the moon, and this guy was thinking about Mars already.
Okay? Oh, wow.
Yes. So this is like some really beautiful stories about Africa. So you can see the correlation, you know, and this makes me ask myself, are we doing enough research? How many more of these guys were not around Africa during that time? But, you know, there was no internet, there was no social media. So whatever you were doing in your village, you were doing in your village. I mean, there was no way that the outside world could know, because the focus was just totally different, you know. And at that time, you would be thinking about space, people would be like, this guy's crazy. And that's what people were thinking about him. This guy's crazy. Just try to think. It's going to be hard, but try to transport yourself back into that time. And, you know, you talked about the needs, you know, the hierarchy of needs. Imagine at that time, you as an African, we're thinking about independence. We want freedom, we want food, we want jobs, we want to be able to walk around freely. And you have some guy who comes and say, hey, I'm training people to go to Mars. You just say, this guy's crazy.
Sure.
This guy was already thinking about the future and things that we are doing right now.
And the unfortunate thing is, I've never read or heard about this before. So the fact that our history doesn't celebrate these sorts of things is a flag in its own right. And hopefully platforms such as this can drum up this awareness, because I wonder if any of our audience actually have ever heard about this Zambian personality. Please do let me know. Perhaps I'm living in ignorance. I don't know.
I didn't know about it as well until last year. I was having a conversation with Marco, and Marco brought that up. So
right.
I also learned that last year. So that was the time that, okay, when Marco brought that up, Marco already had some research on some space initiatives for people with low resources in Africa. Okay. And later on we can talk about, I mean, there are guys building spaceships in Africa, guys building rockets in villages, you know.
Sure.
There's the story of these Nigerian boys in Nigeria. So they built a rocket, right? And they launched this rocket. And then, of course, it didn't go that far, but then the rocket like landed a few meters away and it exploded because it's a rocket.
Right.
And so the police went there, like you see an explosion, and you know, in Nigeria, you have like the Boko Haram and all this bad stuff happening. And so they thought maybe this is an attack. Like
sure.
There. And then the army went there, and then they started investigating, and they went back to this guy's house, and they were like little kids, and they
right.
But the Nigerian government at the time did something good. Instead of arresting them, they said, hey, let's take these kids to school because they have a bright future.
No, that's really,
There are many.
So,
We just need to trace. We just need to do our research.
okay, well, I'm schooled on that. Any other thoughts around this concept of a race to space or the scramble for space and how it applies to our continent?
Make my
I would just
Please,
Oh,
let's go with Ravimba, shall we? Ladies first.
sorry, Mark.
Ladies
I'll make it very.
first.
But what I wanted to say was there was something that someone said a couple of days ago, which has really stuck with me, which was space and the whole industry is really premised on like three nodes, which are firstly research, technology, and exploration. And you can honestly imagine that in the 1950s, none of that was, well, to a certain extent, some of it was happening on the African continent with progressive countries such as South Africa, and maybe even the Arab countries as well. But for the greater part of sub-Saharan Africa, this was not a reality. And what we see from Eldridge's example was an instance of research, and this was from Edward Nkoloso, who founded the Zambian Space Agency, and really the first like Afronaut, I would guess, or Afropreneur in Africa, who really had the vision of exploration beyond, you know, the Earth's orbit in mind. And he undertook a series of different and interesting space exploration experiments, including, for instance, and I wish I could try this out, but like rolling people down a hill in a barrel to simulate like zero gravity and things like that. And I suppose at that time we did have earnest considerations of research, but when it comes to the technology and the actual exploration, we are lagging behind. And I suppose that's where initiatives such as the Space Generation Advisory Council that we're involved in and others as well really come in to fill the gap, because you can only have a fully autonomous space industry when you have all three successful nodes. And unfortunately, or fortunately enough, 2 years back, Zimbabwe launched its space agency. So I suppose that research element is coming in and the youth are playing a very big role in that. But as long, I suppose, as the political will is not expressed, I think it's very difficult as well for citizens to understand that it's not a question about do we need space? It's a question of we already use space in all of our everyday lives, whether you're watching TV or scrolling the internet or withdrawing from a bank, that's some form of satellite infrastructure. So we're well embedded in the satellite and space industry. But now the question is, how do we use it more sustainably? And that's the challenge I suppose we encounter when we try to raise awareness, as we all are earnestly trying to do. And the question at the end of the day then is, what mechanisms can we put into place to really bring this about in a more sustainable way, I suppose. So I'm sure my colleagues have a little more to say about that.
We're going to have to circle back to that, because the question that keeps popping in my mind, and maybe Marco or Rania can pick this one up, is, you know, what business does Africa have? I'm going to play devil's advocate here. What business does Africa have trying to join a space race when the continent faces so many more pressing issues, right? So you've got poverty, you've got deficits, you've got all manner of issues that plague the continent. And when you think of the amount of investments that's required to build a sustainable, meaningful space program, I do wonder whether those resources are being adequately appropriated. Rania, Marco, do you have a view on that?
Yes, Rania, if you allow me, or you want to jump and then I'll go after you.
Go ahead, sir.
Now, Rania, ladies first. I've learned very well with the Musha.
Rania, please go ahead.
We are majority of women, so we can decide that you can
There
go
we
ahead.
go. There we go.
Okay, thank you very much. So I would just add on the top of what Eldridge and Khuvimo very well explained, that Africa is contributing even before this Cold War space race. If you remember, for example, the oldest astronomical place in the world is Nabta Plaja, Egypt, more than 7,000 years before Christ. This is where space exploration, in my perspective, really started, and Africa had contributed to the most of the research about space, even by that time before Christ, because by that time we were using moon phases and and the stations for our agricultural planning. The Nile crops, the Alexandria. If you look on what, by that time we had a lot of people writing in terms of astrophysics and astronomy in Alexandria library. You will see that even way before this Cold War, Africa just started contributing a lot in terms of sky observation. That for me is the first stage of space exploration, because for the first time we start looking into the sky, we start imagining and using it as a reference. The navigations, the navigation using the star, the dark sky. So that's for me the huge contribution that along the history Africa is being delivering to the world. And after that, we just add on top of that technology, and technology just came because of the war. People developed things for the war, and then the spin-off of these bellic solutions, they were just brought back to the other science. And because Africa wasn't on that chapter of the industrial revolution, that's why we couldn't match the huge knowledge we've been developing since those very early stage to what we call now the scientific revolution. But now we have what we call those limited resources that are available to everyone, and we just need to use it in our favor. And that's what Africa can really contribute, because resource management is occupies like more than 50% of the reasons why we send things to space. First is curiosity, then you put those expensive machines on space after the Cold War because you want to better manage your resources. And talking about resources, nothing better to just look on one of the most resourceful continents in the world. So Africa can really optimize the way we explore our resources, and by better exploring these resources using space technology, we can really contribute to or change even the old world economy. So that's just in a nutshell what I can bring in terms of timeline, and adding just putting more sauce to hear Rania bringing with more good news.
So Rania,
just an advertisement. Just an advertisement.
Can we wait until we're done at least 30 minutes before we start the ads, please? I've got too many questions to ask. We will get to, you can plug your stuff a little bit later on. I just want to kind of get to the bottom of this point with Rania around this resource allocation. So when I think of the budgets that you might find NASA has got sponsorship for, or this amount of resources that you get in the West towards space programs, how do we compare, and can we sustainably look as a continent to try and enter this space? I read an interesting report that suggested I think 41 countries have got some activity in outer space from the continent, but none of those launches have happened from Africa. So they've been outsourced, if you like, to countries that have the capability of sending out probes and so forth. If we can't afford it, why are we doing it?
All right, so
my cheeky question.
I'm gonna just add just a short comment about what my colleagues have mentioned. So I totally agree about what they said. Just to tell you, so few African countries joined space market, global space market, since the 16th and 17th. Okay, it was just like an image. It was not really an effective space industry, but actually Sierra Leone has joined like the UN COPUS, United Nations Committee of Peaceful Users of Outer Space, since the 17th. And, you know, several other African countries has joined in that period. But this just to prove that there is somehow an idea of joining space market. But nothing has happened yet, as Eldridge just said. Like, we had been retarded with several other issues and major issues in each country, which are basically the wars. And we had basically no resource and no capability to make anything in real. And we had other problems related to food access, related to poverty, related to security and other things. So we could never imagine and think about creating or developing space technology. And this is a major issue because they were not visionary. They didn't know that at this level we are now consuming a lot space. So just directly answering your question, I have a very good news for you that compared to the whole space budget in the world, do you know what's the percentage of the African countries? 0.2%. That's actually compared to Europe and China. They are investing like $50 billion, I believe, and we are a little bit below $10 million. So that's nothing compared to what they are doing. So we are still in the first steps of space. Of course, here we don't talk about all countries in Africa on the same level because, as I said, like Egypt is in another level so far, South Africa as well. But if you just try to see elsewhere, my country, Tunisia, we are still making the first steps. We don't even have a proper space program to establish, a space market, to establish really to encourage startups and so. So here, we start thinking, like, regionally speaking, from the regionally perspective, we try to understand why we do need space applications, why now we do need space applications. Now we understood and we know and recognize that we are taken, as I said in the beginning, we are consuming space a lot. We use it everywhere. Like, we use for our daily basis, we use space applications and space data. So now we knew that we will gain a lot and we will have like less, how to say, we will be less consumers and will be productive if we try to just either have a real product like a satellite, or we try have a service related to space, which costs less. So here, as you said, we needed a lot for several applications. We need it for the e-commerce, we need it for health, we need it for several other applications for everyday uses. So this is something we all should really communicate it. We should really raise the awareness of this, so that everybody, like all the governments, will understand that this is something that they're gonna use, and it's gonna save a lot of time and a lot of money if they try to produce their own thing. And that's a pity, because in 2021, while others are going to Mars and landing in Mars, we are still trying to establish a space program. This is a bit pathetic, if I may say, but it's actually something we can just do. We don't need to follow the same path. We don't need to make 50 years in order to make the same process over and over again. We can try to think about a new way, a new process. We try to engage more the youth, because of course the youth will be more going, following the path, following the speed of the technology faster than the previous generations. And this is actually something good, because the majority of Africans are young people. So this is something great. And as Ruvumbu said, like here she's doing a great job for space education side. This is something we really need to invest in.
And we could say the same about mobile technology, right? So Africa was behind the curve in telecoms until the mobile came along. And what do you know, we're kind of leading the charge in certain areas of telco. My follow-up question then, with all that framed, I'm curious to understand your views on tech entrepreneurs like Richard Branson, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, right? Who are putting their fortunes towards making great strides in democratizing space travel. And, I wondered if it's likely that the private sector will almost squeeze out countries or space programs, companies beyond this sort of rich elitist group that may actually want to explore life outside of Earth. What are your views on just the commercialization of space and the trends that you're seeing in this area? Nelly, I'm not sure. Maybe remember you can pick this one up for us.
I'll start the discussion off by talking about some different areas that are being commercialized, and just to maybe give a broad outline on what that means. So I think space commercialization has often meant, I suppose, going to Mars, you know, mining from the moon, but it involves any profit-making activity from outer space. And that includes, for instance, in regards to activities that are of interest to Africa and the world, remote sensing capabilities, space mining, orbit or spectral allocation, as well as space tourism. I think those are the 4 developing trends in terms of my research. So when it comes to space commercialization, we're really talking about a broad field that really has a business opportunity oriented view to space, which I think until maybe 5 or 10 years ago was not actually the case. I suppose when the initial space treaties were drafted, it was with the intention of exploring science and exploration, you know, and ensuring that there's some kind of scientific benefit to states, not only that explore actively, but also the ones who are the beneficiaries for these different findings. But I assume now, and I acknowledge now, that there are states and entities who are moving into the more commercial-based industry. And profit making is a very big part of the space industry at this point. And I guess what we do as lawyers and even as engineers.
Remember, we appear to have lost your sound.
Yeah.
So right, there's no sound coming from you. Maybe Marco, you could pick this up for us while Rumba sorts out her sound. Rumba, do you want to give it another shot?
Yes, Ruvimbo, let me know. Yeah, Ruvimbo, are you there? Please don't let me hear alone.
There we go.
Ah.
There we go.
Oh, okay, great.
Off the hook, Marco.
I'm not going to touch my microphone. I think that's what went wrong. But I think you might have lost me where I was speaking about the profit-making ability of the industry, but how we're also focused on the sustainability of the industry as well. And I think it's important to note that every exploration into outer space is intended for 2 primary benefits: scientific and profit. And we need to find a way in which to balance the 2. So what I was trying to advance in order to stimulate the discussion from my research point of view is that there are 4 nodes that are developing in terms of space commercialization. And that is remote sensing, that is also space tourism, orbital and spectrum resource, as well as space mining. So I'd love to hear my colleagues speak a little bit more about that, because of course they know a lot more from the technical side of things, of course.
Yes. Moshe, may I?
Yes. Please go ahead, Marco.
I won't extend too much.
Go
yes,
for
I
it.
won't extend. I will just make a pass by here, just by telling that this matrix of entrepreneurship between new space and traditional space is what we call now because since that Cold War we were discussing, the state, the government was the institution and the authority and the only one capable to invest this huge amount of money in a space mission. But then electronic got very smaller, very cheaper or cheaper, and the access to space from there was enabled to more than the government. And that's where we start looking in this paradigm shift that we are now calling the new space, because a school, a startup, just an individual with the $1 million can put a small satellite in space at 10 per 10 per 11 cubic centimeters nano satellite in space, not with the same capability, but at least accomplishing with all the phases and simulating and making an analog exactly to a huge and big satellite. And I was talking about this matrix. This was even way before those Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk coming. We have scientists playing the same role as an entrepreneur, but those were scientific entrepreneurs that were putting risks and on top of those risks, managing with their organizational structure. We see Goddard just launching rockets, making the first rocket experiments without having any support of NASA by that time, and just making explosions. We see like very huge investments like Space Shuttle and the Apollo missions, like more than $300 million being expended on one space program. This is a huge investment that one person is taking care and facing the concerns of an organization. Korolev the same. You know what happened when Korolev first landed something on the moon before the Americans, when they launched the first probe on the moon, or when they launched Sputnik? By that time, the Russian president was just sleeping and just told me, "You were calling me by that time to tell me that you put something in space? You're crazy. I'll put you on the jail." But the day after, when he saw the impact it made on the United States, just after that, he was recognized as a good hat. And we see a space industry with a value of $1 trillion by 2040. $1 trillion being moved by universities, startups, governments, and Africa. Just bringing back to Africa, we are very timid on that, but we are giving steps on this new space, because I told you 70% of the space industry is the downstream. So the space industry, you have the upstream, that are all those institutions, all those people that work on building satellites, operating satellites, launching satellites. Those are 30% and more connected to the government and some big companies that have the happiness of launching, of having these skills. But 70% is just picking this data of satellite in space and use it for agriculture, defense, communication. And these, you just need a computer with capability to process and the knowledge on data science, data analysis. That's why Africa have like a room to enter on this new space domain. We have so far more than 40 space startups in Africa, but with a very huge failure rate, 56.4 failure rate of the African startups. And this is due to a lot of things that I won't extend and finish all the time on that.
Tell me the top three, Marco. Tell me the top three. Tell me the top three. So I'm assuming investment is one of them, research is another, perhaps. Yes. Investment,
investment, infrastructure, and knowledge.
Knowledge, right? Okay, I got 2 out of 3. Yeah. Sure. Okay. That's really fascinating. And actually, you've touched on quite some potent points there. One of them, which then conjures up thoughts in my mind, is with this rapid expansion on space build-out, space programs globally, who's actually policing this rate of expansion? Who's got the rights to space? And I know that, remember, this is something that is who owns space?
Musha, I will let Rania, Nelly, Eldridge go. Let's go. Make the round,
yes,
and then I'll get back and explain how I've developed a space police with my engineering skills and the amount of knowledge that Fubimbo shared with me.
Is this you advertising, or this is you? Nelly,
no, that's the second one. Okay. The previous one was about the African Space Museum we are building here in Namibia.
We'll get to that. Nelly, are you able to jump in on this idea of who owns space and who polices it? I'm not sure if Nelly's. Yeah.
When we're talking about like who's got access or.
No, it's more about who's got the rights to space, right? So when we think about, you've got sovereign states.
I don't know if you guys can hear me.
We can. I wish I could see you, but we can certainly hear you. Go for it, Nelly.
All right. Okay, so under international law, really, I think outer space has been declared.
We have lost Nelly's sound. I'm gonna go across to Rania, if I may, for an answer to this one. Nelly, sorry, Nelly, your sound is cutting up. Rania, would you be able to pick this one up for me? So I want to understand who owns the rights to space, who polices space.
So I'm not gonna speak as a policist or as a person that is into space law, because this is not my field, but I'm just gonna tell you among of my experience, what I heard, what I saw so far is actually this is a very complicated situation, and this is actually something that is very well regulated in the side of people that have already done a huge step in space. In other terms, there is there is a certain number of conventions, there is a certain number of papers you have to sign if you have to launch something, if you have to do something. So you need to follow the guidelines, you need to understand what are the, for example, the adequate frequencies, the adequate procedures and process to do. But this is actually, you know, this is something that have been already made based on experiences of like space like leaders, let's say. So this is something that they have settled it down for everyone. So what I say here is this is the direct answer of this question is everyone. Normally, and what is actually obviously shown to everyone is this space is open to everyone to launch whatever you want, like of course a satellite, a CubeSat, not something for defense side or for, you know, we don't go into that topic a lot. Actually, this is they ask you just to prepare something that is actually for peaceful uses, of course, and this is something that is following technically, since actually this is my field, they try to that you, for example, you are adapted to these specific requirements in order to launch whatever. And this is actually with these technical sides and technical requirements, there is a branch of other requirements, legal requirements that you have to follow as well. This is actually a very complicated process, and maybe the lawyers here, for example, we have Rumbo, she can really tell you exactly what are the cases where you are completely blocked when you want to launch something that is, how to say, even 90% fine, but just like in few tests or few technical sites that is not exactly as required, they just block your project, they don't let you go in. So that's why I'm saying this is a very complicated one, and it's actually affected a lot by the geopolitical situation.
Sure.
Yeah, of course, this is something we have to put in consideration.
Sure. And remember, as you attack it from a legal standpoint, perhaps you could also talk me through the sustainability angle, right? So, you know, the environment is clearly suffering somewhat from some of these initiatives. Does regulation spill into that? Talk to me about that regulatory landscape, please.
There definitely is some regulation that spills into that. I think if we look back to the era that you directed us to at the beginning of this webinar, 1957, I think there was more emphasis on exploration and not on sustainability. So I think the challenge now that we're coming into is not only on space traffic, which is the number of objects and the operators we have in outer space, but also on space debris, which is also the number of pollutant objects that we have as well. So there are a number of dynamics that are coming into play. And I think we earnestly need to take cognizance of that. The role of space lawyer, I will say, unfortunately, has been undermined for the past few years. I suppose because there was clearly a technical approach to space exploration. But I think now that we're recognizing the interoperability of space, it's recognizing the role that lawyers have to play in coordinating the efforts of space activities. And that includes not only space traffic, that not only includes the technical standards as well, but I suppose also even the mitigation standards. And I think there needs to be a greater cognizance of not only laws, but I suppose uniformity of laws, because unfortunately we have different laws that go around across different jurisdictions. So for instance, when it comes to even the manufacture of space systems, we have the different organizations that come up with their different standards, like the ESO or the ES the ECSS, the European Cooperation on Space Standards, or the International Standards Organization, which come up with different standards, which, even though they are complementary, do have some different provisions. And of course, Africa doesn't have its own standards. So we have to also decide, do we make our own standards, or do we rely on the pre-existing ones, as we have already begun to do in previous years? I know that Africa relies on the ECSS as their standards authority. So there's a lot of discussion on sort of how do we bring about like our own jurisprudence into this own field, and develop our own law, because as far as I'm concerned, we've pretty much translated the laws of other different jurisdictions to our contexts, which are really different. Our needs are different, and that requires different interventions.
Mm-hmm. And is there a dominant regulatory body, or is it, the more guns and muscle you have, the louder your voice is? What are the real dynamics are what I want to get to the bottom of? Marco is kind of shifting around. Let's say your views on this, Marco. Your sound is muted. If you could unmute your line, please.
No. It's not that law framework that I would bring. There is a gap. There is no liability in terms of those illegal activities, but we try to, but time to time, first to identify those illegal activities, having law to reframe those activities, and have an authority that can be that can take part in any country, because as far as we know, this economic power sometimes influence on the way authorities is driven on different levels, and in space is exactly the same. Let's start looking on since 57. Russian and Americans were the ones with the capability to go to space, and the Outer Space Treaty tells that no one can own the space. But they thought, okay, we won't take part of the orbital positions, but as other countries can't use their orbital capabilities, we will use, and when they have the possibility to put their satellites, we will leave this orbital position. And since then, we have been first having, because what's the point of, for example, you claiming a right for something, or going to an authority to claim a right where you don't have capability to explore this resource? That's why Rovimo just shared this thing of managing the frequencies, managing our space slot, because this can be explored. It is like renting this position, even if you can occupy that. But I'll just go further on not only the gaps in regulation, but on illegal activities. We see on June 23rd, like 2 years ago, a Russian satellite was launched, the Cosmos 5023, then registered like one satellite. You have the fees, the bills to pay for one satellite. While arrived in space, this satellite split it on two, and few days before, split it on three. So three satellites making, and we have Luke B and other satellites making what we call some suspicious activities right around other Nigerian satellites, Chinese satellites. And we have Indians making anti-satellite weapons that not only go to against the entire regulation, but let me tell, okay, you tell me that I can't build a missile, but if I make a missile that goes like 90 degrees launch, there's not a missile, it's a rocket.
Right.
But at the end, you launch it and you strike a satellite. So those are the gaps that some of the companies, private companies, governments are exploring and trying to I'm not running away from the question, but the authority must be, I don't know if I can say that, impartial, like non
Sure.
inclined to. And United Nations is not a liability, is not like a court. There are the international court. Please, Rovin Banali, correct me if I'm wrong. But for me, as an engineer, before that, you can have the regulatory frames, but having technical capabilities to track those illegal objects, to track this space junk, to grab those illegal assets, is like a very huge challenge. That's
And
why I think side by side and engineering are trying, like, because if you go too far with the law and you don't have technical capabilities to make it happen, you won't do. You just law on the paper.
yeah,
And on
and
the
it
other
does
hand,
beg the question.
yeah.
It does beg the question, what court has got the power, if you like? How do you even begin to navigate the jurisdictions here? So many questions. Rumble, I can see, has muted her line and perhaps isn't even trying to get these questions answered today because it is a minefield from the sounds of it. Nelly, do I have you back with us?
Yeah, sorry, I'm
Right.
sorry about my network.
That's okay, my dear. Just quickly let me know what your thoughts are around the legality of or the legal framework that surrounds space law. High level, something that hasn't been mentioned that perhaps you want to make sure you drive home.
Okay, I think I'll just pick up from where Marco left off. So if you're looking at like a court that has jurisdiction to sit over matters regarding space, it's going to depend on the kind of matter we're talking about. So if it's between two states, like two sovereign nations, then the International Court of Justice, like by virtue of the statutes governing the court and also the UN Charter, will have jurisdiction like to govern such a matter. But so far there's really not so many cases. I think just one or two, or just one. I think that was with Canada.
Okay, we appear to have lost Nelly. Eldridge, you've been quiet for a while, and my apologies for that. I'm going to shift directions. Nelly, I'm sorry, but we lost you there. But I think we get
that has been taken up, like with some arbitration.
Okay, Nelly's kind of got some special effects going on with her sound. So Nelly, it's okay. I'm going to pivot off this question now because we are going to start running out of time shortly. I wanted to talk about fuels and efficiency in your industry. And Eldridge, maybe you can pick this one up for me. So with fossil fuels depleting and rocket technologies needing to be powered, is there an age, do you think, where we'll start seeing assets being powered by alternative sources of energy, or is that a little bit of a way off?
Yeah, definitely, because you already have a lot of systems working on electric, but not only that, I'll share with you some very amazing news. Like Elon Musk is building the Starship for people to go to Mars, right? And so the Starship is 80% oxygen and only 20% fuel. Yeah. So the idea of that is, for example, if we go to Mars, how are we going to come back? So if you have a ship that it's 100% oxygen at the time, we can, from the ice that we have on the surface of Mars, we can use that ice and turn it into oxygen, and then turn it into fuel to fly back, you know. So obviously, one of the biggest constraints when launching is really the weight. Okay, so this is one of the biggest constraints, and you want to address the weight. And for example, if you need to go to Mars, you need a tremendous amount of energy. Getting into space is very easy. Now, getting into orbit, it's very hard. That's the difficult part. That's really hard, and you need a very big amount of energy. And this energy comes from fuel. But with time, people have already been thinking about alternative ways of, and already implementing alternative technology for fuel. For example, you have the solar cells, but although they have a lot of issues, for example, they're not the efficiency is just not there. It will be too slow. but it's a step towards. People are already developing this type of technology.
Amazing. Guys, as we start to round up, I really must say thank you for obliging my bimbo questions, because you guys to me are rock stars in your space, and this is really exciting stuff you do out there. And one thing that I'm curious to understand is how do we kind of really push for the STEM space at universities and really start showcasing what you do, getting students more interested in aerospace, because this is the future of, these are future skills we're talking about right here, right? The future may well be in space. We don't know what the relationship between Earth and space will be, in 50 years time, for instance. One point that kind of drives my question is, in the UAE, we've got a Vision 2071. And the whole premise of that is really trying to understand how current technologies are going to aid populations to come, nationals, residents living here in 2021. That's 50 years down the line. What do we think is going to happen in your industry, and how do we make sure that those skills are really being passed down, being showcased, students understand, you've demystified your industry and you're just making it appealing? Rania, could you start off with this one for me, please?
Yes, sure. So here, all right, here, just to say briefly, we just need, in my opinion, for all what have been mentioned so far, and just to answer your question, is actually a framework. So we do need to understand what do we need at the end, why we do need space for each region. For example, for Africa, it's much different than any other part in the world, like in UAE or in Europe or any other part. So here we do need to know why we do need space and why we do need to have space applications, how space can really solve major issues in Africa. If people understand, if youth understand the big role that they're gonna play to develop the region, to solve issues, to have better resources, like to have resources available to everyone, to like, for example, to improve the disaster management, to make plenty of other applications for the future. I think on that moment they will really try to go into space. But of course, we also are very curious about space exploration, about going to the moon, going to Mars, about any other space thing we do. Like for my case, for example, I was honestly more curious about going to another planet than just trying to have a satellite communication built. So that's what really pushed me to be in space field. For youth, for example, you can just play on both sides. You can just try to understand, to make so that they know what they want at the end, if they're really interested in space. Here for our space education side, we do need really to make it more diverse. Instead of just thinking about space as only space engineering or only about astronomy, we do need to talk about different jobs in space, which is very diverse. So here we need to make it more demystified, as you said, more simple, more accessible to people. And we do need to direct our speech towards the persons and the age that we are just talking to. So this is something, all these people you see here are doing it so far. And actually, they're actually doing great. And actually, this is something we have to do now, because now we are in a phase of capacity building, and we are in a phase of educating people. So this is the first steps to make everything else happen at the end. And actually, just coming back to just to answer all your questions, now in Africa, we are just making something, as I said, like for user focused. So we need just to solve what are the needs, and we need to understand, to have the applications that are adequate to these needs, which are basically satellites communication, navigation and positioning, Earth observation, astronomy and science. These are actually the main fields that we should really tell youth to make more research on, to understand what they're gonna solve by using these fields.
Absolutely brilliant. Rimbo, I'm gonna have to do this for my fellow Zimbabweans across the world. So I've been asked this question on numerous occasions. I'm sure you're bracing yourself already, but this one is specifically for you, right? So as a Zimbabwean-based space professional, one would question, where do you get your instruction from and how does it work? Zim is not necessarily associated, if you like, with space or this level of advancement, this level of foresight when it comes to sort of the future of stuff, the future skills. Space is obviously quite a heavy loaded industry. And I just wondered how that works for you. If, again, you're looking to demystify your work and attract young people to perhaps get involved in the Zimbabwe Space Program, give me your elevator pitch for what you do.
I think I'll start by saying that I come from Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, the big creative arts industry of the country. And I think that creative nature sort of filters into the work that I do. A lot of what I do really comes from international inspiration. And I'm sure you'll see from even the panel presented today, I have a large network of friends who really feed into my aspirations and who bring all sorts of innovative ideas into how best, you know, we can all come up. And I think the easiest way to justify, I suppose, the endeavor that I'm on is to look at the peculiar challenges that Zimbabwe faces, whether it's water, whether it's energy, whether it's mineral resource management, and look at the potential impact of satellite technology. And I've been able to model that from other countries who have far gone beyond our aspirations and actually gone into the practical realms of what we're trying to achieve. So my motivation really comes from seeing best practices. I think the role of any lawyer is to research best practices. You can't be an informed lawyer without knowing what the full terrain of the legal environment is. And my journey really is to try and uncover, like, what are all of the different areas of the law that I could potentially research and understand in order to bring about sustainable development in my own region. So I'm incredibly fortunate to have had the network that I've had. And I think to have had that Zimbabwean inspiration that I think is in all Zimbabweans, which is the innate ability to go above and beyond our circumstances and to achieve and to think beyond what we have as our available resources, to look into ways of making other people's lives better. My motivation is really just to be different in a unique way. And I think I've managed to carve out a field in the space industry in that same regard, definitely.
Well, you know what, remember, after that, I may just start studying space law because I'm truly inspired. Well done, you. Well done, you. All right, guys, so we have actually kind of come to time. I know that Marco is going to be sending me my marketing bill because he wants to plug something in. So you've got 2 seconds to let us know what it is you want the world to know about what you're doing. And then, yes, I'll make my parting shots before we call this a day.
No. This was on the scope of the conversation, but let me tell you, thanks, Musha, thanks, Uvimbu, Rania Eldridge, Nelly. And now I'll just put myself at your service so we can really start implementing and putting into practice all the things we were discussing and all the needs we need really to address for our countries. So I'm a tool in your hands.
Fantastic.
It's not an advertisement.
No,
if
actually.
From tomorrow you want to start, let's start.
I may start a space program after talking to you lot today. I must say that, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on board. And for anyone who's been following Professional Tribes, you'll be aware that this platform really does serve to demystify industries, get people around the table, build networks, and really just kind of open up spaces that either you don't come across in your normal life, or that you may just have a curiosity about. If you are a person who's keen to learn and to understand the mechanics of the world like I am, there's no place like here to really start to unpack what it is people do when they wake up to go to work in industries that you perhaps have little to no exposure to. This one for me being one where most of my knowledge is either from textbooks or movies. So it's been fantastic to have this panel around today to really just kind of give us some insights into the aerospace industry, the work that they do, the motivations behind their pursuits, and really just kind of start showing us the direction of travel that the continent of Africa has taken. It's deliberately been a Pan-African panel for this very reason. I think when we start to learn of some of the developments happening in various countries across the continent, it's actually quite a point of pride for me personally to know that we've got people who are well informed, kind of looking to implement real and lasting change for a continent that's often written off for not producing stuff that's comparable to the more developed world. So when we have our esteemed guests like this, really just unpacking and giving us insights into the world, I find that completely invaluable. And the hope is that there will be young people watching this who will be inspired to perhaps consider it as a profession. I'd like to think that most of the guests we have here are open to being emailed, to guide, to mentor. If that is indeed the case, I can see some thumbs going up. Then all of them are available on LinkedIn. Please do follow Professional Tribes, and you will get their details off my platforms, both Instagram and Facebook. Do share this video. Let's get people watching and talking about this, because it is a little bit different, isn't it? But again, a massive, massive, massive thank you to you, Rania, Rumbo, Nelly. I'm sorry we didn't get to speak to you as much. Aldrich and Marco, you guys are superstars. She says, that's a pun. Did you get it? You're superstars. Anyway, my cheesy joke's done for the day, guys. Thank you ever so much for your time, and we'll see you soon on Professional Tribes. Take care now.
Bye. See you guys.
See you.
Bye.
Wait for you in Angola. Please come.